There was a time when I was much younger, maybe about 10 years old, when something strange happened that I still think about to this day. My family had just moved to a quiet little town surrounded by woods. The neighborhood was small, with only a handful of houses spread out along a single road. One evening, I was playing outside as the sun was setting. The air was cool, and the trees cast long shadows on the ground. My parents were inside making dinner, and I had wandered to the edge of our yard where it met the forest. I wasn't allowed to go too far into the woods, so I stayed close to the edge. As I was exploring, I noticed something shiny on the ground near a large oak tree. It was a small, round mirror, no bigger than the palm of my hand. It looked old, with an ornate frame that had little carvings of leaves and flowers. I picked it up and stared at my reflection, but the glass was slightly warped, making my face look strange. I didn't think much of it at first and decided to keep it. I slipped it into my pocket and went back inside when my mom called me for dinner. That night I put the mirror on my nightstand before going to bed. Around midnight I woke up to a faint sound. It was like a soft tapping, almost like someone was knocking on glass. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, and looked around the room. The sound seemed to be coming from the mirror. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but the tapping continued. Slowly, I reached over and picked up the mirror. As I held it up, I noticed that the reflection wasn't right. It showed my room, but there was something moving in the background, something that wasn't actually there. I stared in disbelief as the shadowy figure grew closer in the reflection. It looked like a person, but its features were distorted and blurred. It reached out as if trying to touch the glass from the other side. Terrified, I threw the mirror across the room. It hit the wall with a loud crack and fell to the floor, the glass shattering into pieces. The tapping stopped and the room was silent again. My parents rushed in asking what had happened. I tried to explain, but they didn't believe me. The next morning, my dad cleaned up the broken mirror and threw it away. I never told anyone about what I saw in the reflection, but I'll never forget that night. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had kept the mirror. Would the figure have eventually come through? Or was it just my imagination playing tricks on me? To this day, I'm not sure, but I've never looked at a mirror the same way again. In my old neighborhood, a new friend moved into the house across from us about 10 years ago. She was a woman in her mid-40s who lived alone and didn't talk to many people. When someone said hello, she would smile and be nice back. She didn't seem to want to make friends, though. She stayed inside her house a lot and only went outside for short walks or to get her mail. It looked like she was nice, but there was something off about the way she behaved. We used to play with my friends in the front yard, running around and having a good time, while she sat on her porch and watched us for hours without hiding it. We would sometimes look over and see her just sitting there, her face blank as she stared at us. She would look through her curtains to see what we were doing when she wasn't on the porch. It felt like she was always watching us, even when we were home. One night, my parents and I were watching TV in the den and having a good time when we suddenly saw the lights in front of our house come on and a shadow move in the window. We thought there was someone outside, but we couldn't make out their face. My dad got up to see what was going on. By the time he got to the front door, the person was gone. It didn't look like anything was wrong when he looked around. After briefly talking about it, we put it out of our minds and chose to sleep, assuming it was nothing. The next morning, when my dad got up early to go to work, he saw that our solar panel lights, which were stuck in the grass next to our driveway, were gone. There were holes in the ground where they had been dug out. He pulled out of the driveway and looked over at our neighbor's driveway. There, all 5 of our solar panel lights were lined up nicely, just like they were in our yard. He found it so funny that he woke my mom and me up to come see for ourselves. We rubbed our eyes and went outside, still only half awake. It turned out that our solar lights were stuck in the yard next door. We didn't say anything because we're not the type to argue with people. Plus, the lights were only a few dollars, not very valuable. The neighbor was outside watering her flowers, just like she always did. After some awkward looks, we both chose to let it go. She smiled every day, waved, and talked to us like nothing was wrong. After what happened with the lights, we began to notice other strange things. Almost every year, our Halloween and Christmas ornaments would get broken or disappear. It seemed strange because no one else on our block had the same problem. For example, the night before Halloween, our carved pumpkins were nowhere to be found. In the end, we chose not to decorate at all to avoid more problems. Our neighbor also seemed to copy almost everything we did, like the way we put our flowers in the yard and the games we played outside. If we bought a garden gnome, she would have one in her yard the next day. If my mom wore a sun hat, she would wear one too. I noticed that she would come outside and rake leaves if my parents and I were doing so. Even so, we never talked to her about anything or were mean to her because she didn't seem dangerous. It's not really important to talk about the other weird things she did while we lived there. We moved out of that neighborhood, and luckily our new neighbor is nice and polite. My sister went through this when she was in high school. It's been a long time. She's about 39 years old now. She's always been an early riser, and today is no different. She would wake up as early as 5 a.m. She would then sneak into the kitchen, make herself breakfast, and pack her school bag. My parents get up every morning at 7 a.m. and have coffee and food to start the day, but the rest of us get up very late. She does everything by herself because she doesn't want to bother our parents and doesn't need anyone to help her make breakfast or pack her lunch. The next morning, when she was done getting her lunch ready for school, she sat by the side door of our house and waited for the school bus. Now, we don't use the front door very often in the morning. If you sit by the side door, you can see our neighbor's house. Our neighbor had been gone for at least a month at that point, and there was a worn-out, dusty old wooden bench outside their house. 2 women were sitting on the bench, but they were turned away from my sister so she could only see their backs. It looked like they were whispering to each other, the sounds of the morning mixed with their words. There was nothing else she could see about the women. Their hair was all she could make out. Their hair wasn't very long, but it looked tangled, like someone who hadn't brushed it in a long time. It was big, dark, and about shoulder length. A strange language she didn't understand was being used to talk. The women were speaking in a language that didn't sound familiar, and it looked like they were fighting. It was a little scary for my sister because their voices were so high and sharp. She doesn't really believe in ghosts, but she was curious about what was going on. She stayed there and listened carefully as they talked while sitting quietly by the side door. The words were hard to understand, but she could hear that their voices were getting louder. Then she remembered that our neighbor had left and no one was living next door. Even though the house wasn't for sale, she thought it might just be some random people hanging out there. That didn't seem likely, though, because they were on someone else's land. After some time, she got some stones and started throwing them at the women to get their attention. The women stopped talking all of a sudden, so it's possible that they saw my sister throwing rocks at them, but they didn't move from the bench at all. After a while, the 2 women slowly turned their heads toward her. My sister's heart was beating fast and she was scared. As they turned, they laughed, but it wasn't a loud laugh. The sound was more like a creepy, soft laugh that gave her chills. She said she had never been so scared. Before the women could even fully turn their heads, my sister ran to my parents' room and woke up my dad. When he went outside to check, the women were gone. He looked around, hoping they might come back, but they didn't. My dad searched the front and back of the house and found no one. My sister told him everything, insisting the house had been empty for over a month. He thought that perhaps a ghost might want to take over that house, especially since it looked so empty and lonely. The yard was overgrown with weeds and the windows were dirty. The women couldn't have gone very far if they were real. Furthermore, he confirmed that they couldn't have entered the house because all the doors and windows were locked tight. A few years later, the house was bought by a nice family. The old house was torn down and replaced with a new one. Oddly, the new family only stayed for about a month before moving out. We never learned why they left. When we saw them, they often smiled nervously. After they moved out, the house was no longer for sale or rent. I lived by myself as a single mom about 4 years ago. My house is a little ways from town. It's not too far away, but it's not close enough to walk to the town center. Some of my friends live close by and we see each other every once in a while. A lot of people in the area are friendly with each other. One night, while I was up late, something strange happened that I will never forget. My son had already gone to bed for the night, so I washed dishes and cleaned up. My dog, Goldie, was free to roam outside. Goldie loves to run and play in the big field next to my house. While I did the dishes, I turned on the radio and hummed along with the music. That night was pretty quiet, and I was busy cleaning up the house before going to bed. I called my dog back inside. I usually have to call her a few times before she comes back because she often goes to the far end of the land. I saw a small light in the field that I had never seen before while I was calling her. It looked like someone was using a flashlight. The lights on my land made me feel a little safer, so I stayed close to them. If my friend across the street looked outside, he could see me. That made me feel a little safer, even though it didn't make sense. I yelled 3 times to Goldie because I didn't want to go out in the dark to find her. After waiting for a while, I listened carefully for the sound of her paws on the ground. Then something strange happened. A faint male voice called my dog back to the field from the direction of the light. That voice wasn't one I knew. I could see Goldie now standing halfway between me and the light, as if she wasn't sure whether to come to me or go toward the voice. Even though I was scared, I yelled as loud as I could because I wouldn't let anyone hurt Goldie or me. She wagged her tail and ran over to me quickly. It didn't take long for me to grab her and lock the door behind us as we ran inside. All the lights were turned off inside my house so I could see outside without anyone seeing me. My heart was beating fast, but I kept my mind on it. I grabbed my baseball bat and held on tight, ready to fight back if I had to. Next, I checked every door and window in the house to make sure they were all locked. I quickly looked out the side window to see if the light in the field was still there after making sure everything was safe. It slipped my mind that it had been about 10 minutes since I came inside. A small light was turned on in the kitchen to help me see while I washed the dishes. My baseball bat was on the table next to me, ready to use if I needed it. I scrubbed the dishes and tried to calm down while I did them. After about 30 minutes, I finally began to feel a little less stressed. While using a dish towel to wipe my hands, I heard a very loud crash coming from my garage. I quickly went into the living room to call my neighbor across the way. I asked him to look out his front window at my garage to see if anyone was there. I told him I was going to open the garage door, turn on the lights, and press the button in the laundry room. There's a button inside the house, so I don't have to go outside. There's also one on the top of my car for when I'm outside. He agreed to help, but he seemed very worried. I walked slowly to the door in the laundry room that goes to the garage. After that, I pushed the button on the doors inside. The garage light turned on right away. My friend went crazy all of a sudden. He was scared, and his voice was loud when he told me there was a man. A wave of fear hit me, and I quickly took a quick look around the garage. I was just inside the laundry room at this point, keeping a tight grip on my baseball bat. When I opened the door, my heart was beating fast. I saw a guy hiding by the side of my car, which was a very stupid thing for him to do. As I walked slowly around the car, I kept the bat raised and ready to use. I told him, "I know you're crossing the line going through private land. This is where I live. I'll call the cops if you don't leave." I told him that, and he stood up as if nothing was wrong. He walked out of my garage like a gentleman, saying, "But I'm just a friendly neighbor who came here to look around your house." I did not answer and instead shut the garage door. I then looked around to see if anything was missing. Thankfully, nothing was gone. I found the toolbox he had knocked over by mistake, which was what I thought made the loud crash. He must have been slow because he was caught before he could take anything from me. Since someone broke into my house, I called the cops to report it. From what I could see, he was able to open the small garage window and squeeze inside, barely making it. The cops showed up and asked me a few questions about what happened as they looked around. After I told them what I thought, they told me to stay safe and left to search for the guy. A few days later, I learned that someone had been caught doing the same thing nearby, but I'm not sure if it was him. I'm not sure how to start this. I'll do my best to explain everything I remember. This happened this morning, so it's still fresh in my mind. I woke up feeling strange and have spent the whole day looking for answers online. I've read forums, looked at different websites, and even watched some videos, but I still haven't found anything useful. I believe I am going crazy the more I search. Only a post from about 3 years ago came close, but it had nothing to do with what I'm going through. I've always been a late riser. Now that I work from home, I can set my own hours, so I usually go to bed late and wake up late. It was probably around noon when I finally got up this morning, and the house was very quiet. That's when I realized my family wasn't home. Like always, I didn't hear any sounds. It felt a little off, but at first I didn't think much of it. Usually when I wake up, my wife and kids are already busy with their own things. I'm used to seeing them outside or around the house. However, the back door was wide open when I went to make a bagel. I thought my wife might have gone outside to play with the kids in the yard, so I went to check. But when I looked around, I didn't see anyone. Not in the yard or nearby. I thought she must have left the door open. After that, I closed the door. When I turned around, I saw that the front door was also wide open. I thought it was strange. Through the open door, I could see both cars still in the driveway. So I went to check if my family was in the front yard, thinking they might be playing or talking to a neighbor. I looked around but didn't see anyone. I started to worry, thinking the worst. Then, I noticed that our neighbor's front door across the street was also wide open. The people next door are very close friends. The dad is a childhood friend of mine, and our kids have known each other since they were born. Thinking my family might be over there, I walked over and knocked on their door before stepping inside. I called their names, but the house was eerily quiet. The living room was empty, and I couldn't see or hear anyone. They were nowhere to be found. At this point, I began to feel scared. Both my house and my neighbor's house had all of their doors wide open. All of their cars were in the driveways, yet there was no one there. I walked back to my house to grab my phone and call for help. My heart was pounding as I rushed inside. Just then, I noticed that the front door of the house next to mine was also wide open. That's when I lost it. It felt like something out of a horror movie. I looked down the street and saw that all the front doors on my block were wide open, but there was no one in sight. I quickly ran back inside, heading to my room to grab my phone, which had been charging all night. As soon as I unplugged it and unlocked the screen, I heard the front door open and the familiar sounds of my wife and kids. I rushed to the kitchen, where my wife was unloading grocery bags. Relief and confusion hit me all at once. I asked her where she and the kids had been and how they got around without a car. She gave me a puzzled look and said they had only been gone for about an hour. I explained everything that had happened: the open doors, the empty homes, the eerie quiet in the neighborhood. She listened, but looked at me like I was losing my mind. She suggested that maybe I had been dreaming, but I knew I wasn't dreaming. I remembered everything vividly. It all felt too real. I could tell she didn't truly believe me, even though she said she did and offered to look into it with me. I couldn't blame her. It sounded crazy, even to me. Trying to calm myself down, I decided to check with our neighbor across the street. When I spoke to him, I was shocked to hear that he and his family had been home all day. I had been inside their house earlier, looking for my family, but it had been completely empty. I started to doubt my own memory, questioning everything I had seen and experienced. How could their house have been empty? How could every door on the block have been wide open without anyone around? For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. My wife and kids went about their day as if nothing had happened, but I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see the neighborhood deserted again. I still don't know what happened that morning. All I know is that it felt like I had stepped into a different version of reality, if only for a short while. To this day, I haven't found an explanation, and the memory of those open doors still haunts me.